Hello. So today we're going to do something a little bit different. I've been pretty much exclusively doing book reviews for a while now, but I wanted to talk about a new change I'm going to be making in my book reading process, as well as also discuss some other things that aren't changes, but something I do when reading books. I'm generally trying to increase retention of the information I find useful, as well as also making it easier to read a lot. And so these are my 5 things that I'm engaging in as part of my reading process. At number 4, the mind mapping is going to be the new introduction. So let's jump into talking about them. So highlighting and annotating. In all of my books, I highlight a lot. I don't write in the margins very much. That might be something I start doing. Generally speaking, writing in the margins takes a little while. And if I have a thought on the book, I'd rather write outside of the book so far. But when you highlight something, it forces you to do a few things. Or when you are highlighting, first, it forces you to be on the lookout for useful information, and just the holding a highlighter and just thinking about, oh, is this useful, causes you to attend to the book in a different way. My experience is that I am more alert and less likely to start daydreaming while reading if I am highlighting, because I am trying to figure out which information is useful or I find interesting, and obviously I highlight it. The second thing about highlighting is that when you highlight something, you reread it. So you just get in an extra rep of reading the information you think is good, at least one, because highlighting mechanically takes longer than reading. So you could actually probably read it 2 extra times, whatever it is. And so you're getting a lot of extra reps of the useful information specifically, which I think is better than just reading something twice. I think highlighting and reading it once is a better way of, more efficient. Also takes less time. The second thing I do is, after I'm done reading the book, I set it aside for a little while until I'm going to review it. And then before I review it, I reread through all my annotations. And this can take quite a while depending on how much I annotate. Generally, if something is a bit more story entertainment heavy, I might annotate as little, or rereading the annotations might take as little as 5% of the time it takes to read the book. If it's something I highlight pretty heavily, rereading through all the annotations might take about 30% of the time it takes me to read the book the first time through. But once again, you're getting another rep of all the information you find especially useful in the book. And all in all, perhaps these number 1 and number 2, highlighting and annotating, and then rereading through your annotations a little bit later, that takes maybe 50 to 75% extra time of reading the book, I'd say, something like that. But it improves retention a whole lot. And I've found that since I've started annotating a lot, it makes it easier for me to go back and figure out the important stuff. If I actually want to look something up, it's way easier, and I save a ton of time doing that instead of sometimes having to reread a whole book to find information. And 2, I think my retention is a lot better. The third thing I do, and is I think something that's not for everyone, is I read multiple books at once. I read like 10 books at a time. And the reason for this is, I think that, so in order to integrate information, studies seem to indicate that sleeping is a very important part. In a lot of books, nonfiction books, what they do is they scaffold information. So you need some information to go on to the next level of information and then go on to the next. And so I like to have the idea that I sleep in between the useful information. So as much as possible, if it's a nonfiction book, I will try to avoid reading multiple chapters in a day of a book, which means if I want to read the volume that I'm reading, I have to read multiple books simultaneously. Another reason for doing this, for at least for me, is if I keep reading one book, I'll actually get bored pretty quick. And shifting between books is a little bit disorienting, but it forces you to pay attention. Otherwise, you'll be very quickly lost. And so that it's a little difficult to shift between books is stimulating, I think. And so I read around 10 books at once. I read 2 pages, perhaps a day, of the more difficult books, and maybe 10-ish pages of the easier ones. If I'm making a push for a book to try and finish it, I will read 20 pages-ish, or however much is a chapter, something like that. And that's generally translates to, depending on how much reading I'm doing, is anywhere between 50 to 100 pages a day. Although, I've done a couple like reading challenges where I try and read a book a day for a month. I've done this twice. The first time through, I read books cover to cover, like an entire book cover to cover in one day. And my retention on that was terrible. Relative to the second time, I started all the books on day one, and I read the shortest book. I finished the shortest book on day one, but then I read like just a little bit from every other book, and my retention from that time through was much better. So if you are going to do something extremely high volume of reading, I would also suggest multiple books at once, or at least giving it a try. I think it might not be for everyone. Number 4, and this is a new thing that I acquired from, I forget the name of the book, a mind mapping book I read recently, is doing mind mapping before I read it and after. So what mind mapping is it is a note-taking device where you write something in the center and then you create branches, and it's very organically evolved note-taking device. It's associative, and it's unlike an outline, it's very easy to go back and add to it, and it's more stream of consciousness friendly. You can look up information on mind mapping. And so the idea is I mind map before I read the book what I think the book's going to be about and what I think I know about the topic. And then I mind map after the book what I actually learned from the topic. Something I might do is I might mind map each chapter on one at a time. I'm not sure yet exactly how I'm going to implement this, but this is the new thing I'm going to be trying out to see how it works. The logic behind it, when I was reading it, seemed pretty good, and my experiences with mind maps already seems to be that they are very efficient ways of organizing thoughts in terms of the amount of time it takes to do one and how coherent the ideas feel after you do it. Part of this is likely because it kind of pins the ideas down in a way that is more visually accessible. I think a large part is. So, and then number 5, something that should be obvious as part of my process, is I review the books after I read them. And I think that this actually improves retention, and the utility books can provide by quite a bit. And it makes you read in a more intentional way where you're thinking about, okay, is what I'm reading useful? What do I think of this book as you're reading it? How would I summarize this book is another one, because if you're concerned about summarizing the book during the book, you'll think about examples or stuff will pop out as being like, hey, this is a good way to capture this idea. The second thing is I was careful to, when reviewing books, I don't just give a general score of the book, like 1 to 5. I made a list of, several different categories that I rate the book on, although I'm going to update that once I get done reviewing all the books from 2020. And just having a hierarchy of things that you think are important for your book reading process, and it doesn't have to be the same as mine, just for whatever reason you read books, you can make categories and then rank them. It makes you think about and reorient yourself as to what's valuable when reading a book. And I think that the process helps keep you grounded in what you think is important. I think it's important to think about what you value. And so if let's say utility is one of my values for books, something might be very engaging, but if one of my values is not being entertained or being engaged, I will recognize that when I'm reviewing the book, and I'll give the book a low score. What I've found when doing this with the current rating system I have is abstract philosophy books rate lower than I would rate them if I was just giving them like a 1 to 5 stars type of thing. And the reason why is that they're generally kind of tough to read. And I think that this entire process of rating books, especially the more abstract philosophy books, has made me discover that I think in a lot of cases, reading other people's summaries or explanations of philosophers' thinking is probably actually just a more effective way to go about it than reading the actual source material. So you could read someone's summary of, let's say, Adam Smith, is probably way better than reading The Wealth of Nations yourself. I read The Wealth of Nations, and it's like a lot of it's just kind of boring or repetitive, and then some of it's super interesting, but someone else can suss that out for you. And so that is something that was drawn to my attention. And I think like the story of, oh, I read this super difficult philosopher book, I think it's a neat story, but if you're just trying to acquire the information in an effective way, I think trying to tackle the extremely difficult texts instead of reading like an introduction or an explanation of the text is probably just not very efficient. And so there are others. So like another example of why reviewing the book and ranking your values of reviewing it might be important is, let's say you're in design, right? And you come up with, let's say, 5 points of design principles when reading a book. They could be, I don't even know what they would be. But when you are rating stuff on that scale, and you know you're going to be doing that later, it prompts you to think about those categories of things while you're reading the books. And so you're more likely to come up with ideas that might be useful to you in your practice. So presentation of the book is something that I rate the books on, is readability. And so that's, roughly speaking, I think it's too close to difficulty. I kind of think that they're like a similar idea, but like how well do you convey the information? And it's given me a large appreciation for authors that don't have monstrously huge paragraphs, because huge paragraphs are just harder to read through, even if it's just a formatting thing, right? But if you took 4 paragraphs and you just scrunched them all together by deleting the indentation and the break, it would just make the book so much harder to read. Similarly, and also just like visually, it's like taxing on the eyes a little bit. Another thing is like including bullet points. It helps readability, and having at the end of chapters having summaries, I think improves the book considerably, and I think it's something that every nonfiction book should do. And a lot of books, it's not new information is the thing. And so if I don't have this reviewing system where I am valuing both utility and readability, I won't emphasize this summary at the end of chapters as much, but I think it's tremendously important because of the way I review the books. And so these are the 5 things that are going to be my process moving forward. I currently do 1 to 3 and 5, but I'm adding in 4. If anyone has, as far as discussion goes, does anyone have any specific processes that they have for reading that they think are particularly good for improving either retention or enjoyment of the book? And if you have those, feel free to share, and have a good one.